Mac Power Users, episode 727, The Productivity Field Guide. Hello, everyone. This is David Sparks. I am joined, as always, by Stephen Hackett. Hello, Stephen.
Hey, David. How are you?
I am great. We are the Mac Power Users, where we help you become the master of your Apple technology. Today we got a very special episode of the Mac Power Users. Are you old enough to remember when they used to do that, Stephen, on TV?
Like a special episode, like a special crossover. You know, you're watching ER and some doctor from another show shows up.
No, when I was a kid, a very special episode was when, when the main character got drunk or had some drugs or had some real challenge. Very dramatic, a very special episode where Alex takes too many pick-me-up pills or something. I don't know. It was a thing back in the day, right?
You certainly had a type of TV show you enjoyed. That's what we're learning.
Oh, no, it was like comedy shows would do it. That was what was weird about it, and they would say it's a very special. So it'd be like a typical sitcom, but suddenly the main characters got serious problems and we'd all watch it together. It was a big deal.
But no one has serious problems today.
Apparently not. Especially if they're productive, right?
Hey, yes.
See what I did there?
Yeah, no, you've buried the lead. You're the man of the hour this week because you have launched a new field guide, and we're going to get all into that on this episode. And on More Power Users, the longer ad-free version of the show, there's a link in the show notes. You can check it out to learn more. We're going to be talking about our plans for the Apple Vision Pro. Apple recently announced that it's going to go on pre-order at the end of this week and ship the very beginning of February. We're going to talk about our plans and the questions that we have, because at this point, Apple hasn't really told many people what's really happening when orders go up.
Yeah, this seems like the least, the most opaque launch I've ever seen in terms of what's going on here. But we've got lots to talk about on More Power Users today. So we'll do that.
So you have your new field guide, the productivity field guide. We're going to get into some of the behind the scenes stuff. But first, I kind of want to set the stage, and I want to start with the word productivity. As you said in your blog post, sometimes that word has negative connotation or bad vibes attached to it, as the kids would say. And I'd love to know your take on that and why this field guide kind of stands apart from some of that stuff that people see online and maybe feels a little cringy.
Yeah, I was just thinking about my comments earlier. This is a very special field guide, right? Because most field guides I make are like how to master Obsidian or how to, make shortcuts. And, it's really kind of nuts and bolts productivity use of your Apple technology. That's my thing. But along the way, over the years, two things happened. First is, I don't know, about 10, 15 years ago, I started to get serious about the idea of productivity and what it meant for me and kind of what my purpose is, to get hippie for a second. And I kind of went on a little journey with that and kind of came up with a solution that I largely kept to myself. But then people would start writing me like, oh, you're a lawyer, you're releasing all these things. I'd love to know your secret for shipping all this stuff. And that got me thinking, well, maybe I should share what I do because I've got a system. But then I also thought, well, I'm not like one of those productivity guys. I mean, there are guys out there that make a living talking about this stuff who read every book and, blah, blah, blah. And that's not me. But I do have a system that works for me, and it did have a lot of intentional thought in it. So I started 7 years ago writing a book about how I do it. And it's the most on again, off again project I've ever had. I'd start it and then I'd get close to finishing it and I'd be like, nobody wants to hear me talk about this stuff. And then I'd set it down and I'd come back to it and the emails would continue. And I was making the Focus podcast where we kind of talk about this stuff. And eventually the sine wave got to a point where I had built the productivity field guide and I launched it, and it's been very successful. I've been very happy with it, but it is just different for me. And to get back to your question, I think the problem with the word productivity is it's become synonymous with kind of life hacks, like the idea of like, if you're productive, you can handle your email faster. And we talk about that stuff on the show all the time. I think that's a good thing, but that's not actually the big capital P productivity.
Mm-hmm.
To me, productivity really means, are you working on the important stuff and ignoring the unimportant stuff? Like
Right.
that's the thing, right? I mean, we all have limited time. None of us have enough time to do all the stuff that's being demanded of us. So can we put on our big boy and big girl pants and figure out the stuff that's important enough to break through? And how do you do that? And that's what this guide is about. It's not, in fact, it's, you're not going to get quick tips for OmniFocus in this guide. It's really more about figuring out what's important in your life and sharing the system I use to do that. And I, that's why I was a little nervous about releasing it, but I've been super happy since it's been out because so many people are like totally getting it. And so I did that.
Yeah, one thing that I really love about this field guide is that you repeatedly throughout it ground it in those real world things, right? I think a lot of writing and talking about productivity is a little pie in the sky, like not really grounded kind of where the rest of us are here on Earth. And I think you do a really good job in this of returning to that over and over. It's like, well, what do these decisions actually mean in my specific relationships? What does it look like in my specific work? And I think that's important because I think without that, you do kind of stray into that territory of some of the negative feelings some people have about this stuff. But
yeah,
I mean, congratulations on the launch. It's been exciting. We're going to talk about the backstory in a little while, but I know it's been one that's been in the hopper for a long time. And one thing you've done with this is something you've done on a couple of your other recent field guides where you have a couple of different editions. Could you explain those differences to people?
Yeah. So the field guide itself is 50 videos, 5 hours long. And this one has a book in it because I'd been writing this book for all these years. So if you get this what I call the standard edition, it's $50. You get the book and the 5 hours of video courses. But I've really enjoyed with the last couple of them adding on an extended webinar series. The fancy term people use is cohort. I'm not really sure that's what I'm doing, but it's a webinar series where the people that get in get to go through kind of the course where we go through it together. You get to work with each other. We had questions and answers. I have guests in, and we go through the topics of the course in greater detail. And then we record those. So if you can't make it, you get to watch them. And like on the Obsidian one, it was going to be a 6-part series. It ended up being a 10-part series because I had more, I found more stuff to talk about along the way. So we got an additional basically 10 hours of content in the course. This one is starting out. We've got 13 of them booked. So it's going to go for most of the first quarter of this year. But you get this webinar series. And then the other thing you get is there is now a community. I use Teachable as my backend, and they've added a community feature where you can have like a message board. And I thought for this one, that would make sense because, when you're talking about developing your guiding roles and RTA and things we'll get into later, it'd be good to be able to talk to other people about it. So I created a little, community for it. So the standard edition gets you the 5 hours plus the book. The plus edition, which is $100, gets you both of those things plus the webinar series and the community. And it's just a way that allows me to, to bring extra value. But, it's going to take a lot of time and money, and I got to hire people to help with some of the edits and things. So it's going to cost more money, but I think it brings additional value. And what I found with the Obsidian one is the people that went through the plus content really got a lot out of it. And it, and a lot of them came back with this one. They immediately went for the plus version. And it's just, it's really nice for me too, because it helps me, be able to keep making these because I'm making enough money off them that I can afford to. But it also allows me to, what I feel like, deliver the entire experience to the customer. Like the people that got the plus version, a lot of them so far that already got it have gone through a lot of the material, and now they're looking forward to, getting their questions answered and talking to other people as we go through these webinars. So you've got the two options. If you don't want to spend as much, that's cool. You're going to get the basics. If you want to get the the plus version, that's there for you too. And it's been a really good model for me.
When you build a field guide, when you're kind of in those starting steps, I know this one has been a long-term project, so maybe it's a little bit different. Are you now thinking from day one about standard versus plus? Like, is this going to be a part of it moving forward, do you think?
Probably not all of them. Some of them, I don't think it makes sense to do a webinar series. Like there's a couple titles I have in mind that I don't think really justify it. But if it makes sense, I'm going to do it. Like Obsidian made sense. This one makes sense. But going forward, it's going to be a case by case basis, really. Mm-hmm.
There were a couple of things I just wanted to throw in here about the production of these videos, because I know you've been hard at work at increasing your production value. And the new studio looks so good on camera. That back wall with the textured wood, like it looks so good. The first thing I always notice, because it's the beginning of each of these videos, is your Vestaboard openings are so good. The sound, the letters clicking and clacking over.
Thanks.
It makes me want one real bad.
Well, this one I felt like, because this is such a different field guide. Normally I use a graphic titling at the beginning of each video, but this one is so different. This one is really not about the apps. So I wanted to signal that somehow. And so I set up the Vestaboard. I shot all the titles. I shot the transitions. Actually, when I first did it, it was like 8 or 9 seconds to do the full transition, and some of the early feedback I got from Labs members was like, I really like your Vestaboard, but waiting 9 seconds at the beginning of each video isn't cool. And so actually I switched that out. I reshot them and it's just like the end of the transition. So they're much shorter. But I think it came out really great. And I really love the Vestaboard too. And honestly, one of the reasons I built the studio was this productivity field guide, because I knew I have a lot of video of me talking to the camera. And historically, my field guides are heavily screencasted, right? It's you looking over my shoulder at my screen, me showing you how to do something. But this one is more about, figuring out what's important to you. And it requires me to talk to you face to face, kind of. And I didn't want them to be like, hostage videos. So like a guy sitting there in front of a white wall looking at a camera. It just, I really wanted it to be an enjoyable experience for the people who watch these videos. And that's one of the reasons, honestly, I built this room, as I had this field guide in mind as I was picking that wall. And the other thing I did is I threw some more money at the problem, and I bought a second a slider. And so I had, for each shot I had a camera facing me head on, but I had another camera on the side that was sliding back and forth. And then, using Final Cut, it's very easy to like jump between those. And then that way, at least you don't have to just look at me, look at the camera for 5 straight minutes. You can have occasional videos sliding back and forth. And another thing I did is I hired Mike's wife. Adina Hurley is an outstanding artist. Mm-hmm. And she made what we ended up calling Stick Sparky. And she would watch the videos and say, oh, I'm going to make a Sparky here on a sailboat or something. And so she made images that we would drop in occasionally too. Anything we could do to break it up a bit so it's not so monotonous while you're watching them.
I think it's really nice. And the slider thing, I think some people overdo that in video, but it's so subtle. And you're moving the slider very little distance and very slowly. And it really looks nice. What hardware are you using for the slider? Like, is it motorized? How does that work?
I got the iFootage one, which was recommended to me by a listener who is somebody who does more of this. And it's really small. It's 16.5 inches, but it slides on like 2 axes. So if you put it on a tripod, it goes 32 inches, but it doesn't take up a lot of space when you're not using it. And it's like stupid easy to use. Like you put a battery on it, you set the camera at the beginning point and the ending point, and you just say, go back and forth. And it just does that. I mean, I would recommend it if you want to get into this. It's very easy to use though. And I want to credit JF Brissett. He does a lot of editing for me, and he kind of took the lead on editing those slider videos, and he has a nice touch, right? He didn't like overdo it, and he hit the camera beats kind of based on what I was saying, so it didn't seem completely random. So I thought JF did a great job of like getting the balance of that right, but I do think it helped. You know what I mean? I really, like I said, this is such a different topic for me, and I knew it was different. I spent a lot of time kind of thinking about how to do it. Like I also did some top-down video of me doing some of this stuff analog, and I just really wanted to make it an enjoyable experience. And I know there are people out there in the world doing a better job of production than I am, but I am trying to get better at it.
No, I think it's definitely improving each time, and I do like the mix of the overhead shots. You have some screen capture stuff, which I always think of as like the classic MacSparky thing. Is like screen, really nice, highly produced screen capture stuff. But yeah, overall the production looks great, and I know you work hard on that, and it is really, I think it's really paying off.
Yeah. Well, this was such a different title. Like the next one I make will not have nearly as much complication involved, but I think it came out good, and I'm proud of it. And like you said, the Vestaboard openings are different, the multicam, all this stuff. I think helps kind of get the point across of why this is important, and hopefully helps people out.
And now the Vestaboard is a business expense. I mean, I see what you did, right? Like it's just
there you go.
It's just right there.
Well, I've used it in the labs quite a bit too. And then the other thing I do with the Vestaboard often is when I do like webinars or I show up to speak for something, I just put it right behind me and put the title or the link or whatever on it. So it's actually served its purpose pretty well. It's ridiculous how much money I spent on it, but I still really like it. It makes me happy. This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by 1Password. Go to onepassword.com/MPU to get 20% off your new plan and start protecting yourself, your family, and your coworkers today. The days of managing your passwords in a text file or a notebook, those are gone. We need powerful password protection these days because the bad guys are always looking for ways to get into our data. And moreover, it's more than just passwords at this point. We also need to be able to deal with storing secure information. We also need to be able to deal with the fact that some of these websites we deal with get hacked and we don't even know it. That's why Stephen and I are both avid users of 1Password, and we have been for years. 1Password is a security solution. It's not just a password manager. It handles all that stuff for you. 1Password gives you what you need when you need it. If you need passwords, checkouts, if you need to protect your banking information or credit cards, it also makes it easy to share. You can set up shared password vaults for easy family or team access, so you give everybody just what they need. And you can quickly share any 1Password item from your desktop, app, or even the browser. Watchtower is one of my favorite features of 1Password. That's where they keep an eye on the internet for you, and they let you know when there are compromised websites that you deal with or have passwords for. But it does more than that, too. It lets you know passwords that are vulnerable or reused. If you've got weak passwords, it points them out, and it even points you to unsecured websites that you're using and encourages you to get on secured ones. If you've got sites that you work with and they add two-factor authentication, 1Password lets you know and puts it in Watchtower so you can go set that up. If you're interested in setting up passkeys, it does that too. It shows you the sites and the vendors you deal with that have passkey support. They've just got the entire security suite handled for you, and I love that. 1Password is secured by design. They have a secret key for your account password that only you have, providing a unique layer of security, so they can't see the passwords or sensitive information stored in 1Password. They can't share it, sell it, and neither can anyone else, and they're verified by experts with regular third-party audits and the industry's largest bug bounty to help them act on threats before they can affect you. I just feel safe with 1Password. I've been using it for a long time. I feel like these people really care about protecting my privacy. Somebody needs to look out for me, and 1Password is the company to do it. You can show your support by the Mac Power Users to go to onepassword.com/MPU and sign up there. You get 20% off, and you get some excellent protection. So thank you, 1Password, for all of your support of the Mac Power Users.
I want to talk some about the system that you lay out in the field guide. We're not going to give away all the secrets. People should go check out the field guide, of course. But one thing that really jumped out at me, and it's a big pillar of what you talk about, and you've talked a lot about it on the show as well, is this roles-based approach to productivity and really to life, and how that contrasts with goals. Listening back to our recent journaling episode and some others that you've talked about, this has been woven into what you've been talking about on Mac Power Users for a long time. This idea that you as a person occupy these different roles, whether it's a spouse or a partner, a parent, a coworker, an individual. And this really is a lens that you look through basically everywhere. Could you expand upon that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, for me, just a little backstory, right? I out of law school, I got married, had kids, got a mortgage, like everybody, right? You get started with life. And I was this trial lawyer for a long time. And I was living from job to job, basically, or trial to trial. And, you're doing your best to be a dad, you're doing your best to win your cases and do all the various things in your life. And I always felt like I wasn't really holding it together that well. Like I didn't have a framework for my life, if that made sense. You just do the best you can with what you're dealing with today, and everything's a little haphazard. And I knew that wasn't good enough. But I honestly didn't really get serious about fixing that until like my early 40s. I'm 55 now. And I went for like 15, 20 years where I didn't really have much of a plan. And I knew it, and I just avoided it because I knew it would be a lot of work to figure that out, right? And I was too busy with everything I was doing as it was. I feel like a lot of people have a similar experience. And I've heard since I released this from a lot of people that have gone through that. And so I started getting serious about it. And at the time, I was reading a lot of stuff. I've always read productivity books. I started with Dale Carnegie and kind of worked my way through the lineages. But a lot of it was like what they call core values or goals based productivity. Like pick a big thing, like you want to write a novel, and then build your life around getting the novel written. And that never really landed for me because I felt like it was temporal. Like, okay, well, let's say you write the novel, then is your life over? I mean, or you have to like start over again? It just never really made sense to me. And then core value kind of systems always felt really nebulous. Like, well, how do you decide which is a core value, and how do you compare them when they conflict with each other? Mm-hmm. And so I started writing a lot, like sitting down and just writing down what I'm thinking about my life and what's important to me. And it really came out over the course of writing a lot of pages that the thing that's most important to me is the roles I play. I mean, it's very important to me that I take care of my wife. It's very important to me that I take care of my kids. And then, I started, these roles just kind of naturally grew out of it. And I think of it really as three categories. There's like outward facing roles, like husband, father, brother, friend, that's a group of roles you have. And then I think there's the work role. For me, it's Mac Sparky, but for the longest time, it was Mac Sparky and lawyer. And then I have the inward facing roles, which are like the, healthy and physically fit and, spiritual and, those types of things that you think about yourself. So I decided that was going to be the foundation of the system about, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I started writing these roles down and I said, okay, that's it for me, is these roles. And so that has always been the focus, and it makes it really easy to do things technically. Like in OmniFocus, I have a folder for each role, and I can see what projects I'm doing in each role. And, in the calendar, I have roles. In the journaling, like you were saying, how this bleeds into the show is I have made these roles like kind of the lingua franca of my life, and it goes between all these different apps, and I can always kind of see how I'm doing in any app because I've got everything categorized. And the other benefit of it is if something shows up that doesn't fit into a role, it makes me think, well, do I need a new role, or is this something that isn't important? Because if it doesn't serve a role, then maybe it's not something I should be doing, mm-hmm. which has led to me turning down a lot of things over the years because I'm like, oh, that's fun and interesting, but it doesn't really fit into an existing role, and I'm not willing to add another one. The roles thing also was very beneficial to me in deciding to give up my fancy lawyer job because over time and reflection, I became increasingly aware that I had the Mac Sparky role had a lot on its plate that I wanted to do, and I was more interested in that than the lawyer role. And if it became possible to do that and not go bankrupt, I realized that was important to me. But it was because I had the roles that I was able to reflect on it. So it's given me a really excellent system to kind of judge my life and keep track of things.
I think it's interesting to compare this to the concept of areas of responsibility, which is a big thing in GTD. It's definitely how I kind of approach like my organization in Todoist or Apple Notes or even my emails, kind of this area of responsibility. What is my domain when it comes to different projects at work or at home or whatever? But the roles-based approach is almost a level higher than that. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, and that's the point, to be the top level, right? The thing that stuff attaches to. And the other benefit of the roles is you can prioritize them as you decide them. Like for me, husband is number 1, father is number 2, Max Sparky isn't until number 4, And so it helps me decide, how to deal with it. I mean, as we're recording today, just a little behind the scenes, my daughter's in Florida, her car is here, we've got to ship it there. And she called me. Well, she gets through my focus mode when we're podcasting. She hardly ever calls me. So we stopped. But that's because she's number 2 and Mac Power Users is part of Mac Sparky number 4. And I said, Steven, I got to stop and take this call, right? So, that is like just a practical application of that. And you see it when you get challenged, like, well, should I be working on this thing or that thing? If you've got your roles prioritized, a lot of times you've already made the decision, so you don't have to struggle with it.
That's really what I like about it. And I think when you can be clear with the people in your life about what those roles are and the organization, like I, both as a fellow dad, but also a friend of yours, like, yeah, of course, when your daughter calls, we're going to pause the show, right? No second thought on my part, because I know that's 1, how you're going to operate, but 2, how I would operate as well. And I think that clarity is really important. And I think that's one area that I've really focused on maybe the last 2 years or so of kind of backing away from the areas of responsibility quite so much. I still think for me personally, that works well as like a nuts and bolts way to organize my task list. But in terms of the way I think about things and the way I prioritize things, the roles-based approach has made a big difference for me because it brings that level of clarity that when the phone rings or when you get that, that text message or that email and something comes breaking in, you almost immediately know, okay, where does this stack up versus the mode I'm in right now? Is this something that I'm going to pause for and go handle, or is it going to wait because what I'm doing is organically more important because of the role that it falls under? I think it's a super smart and clever way of thinking about this and really impactful because it gives you that clarity.
Yeah, and the course starts out with me helping you how to figure out what your roles are. And I use it through, I use the analogy of carrying water. Merlin Mann had that great analogy years ago saying like, you can't put 2 liters of water in a 1 liter bin or something. And that really is a visual thing. As we take on so many responsibilities, we physically can't do it. We just can't. So I encourage you to figure out your water. How much water are you carrying? What are you doing? Write down for a while and then start categorizing that, and your roles emerge from that. And, all this stuff just takes time. This is also a weird field guide in the sense that I give you assignments. I don't do that normally. I don't say, okay, now go write a Keyboard Maestro script, that's silly. And this one, I give you a little bit of homework as you work through the course. And so the idea is, okay, let's figure out what your roles are and get them prioritized. And then that leads into, for me, the big part of this is the arete.
Yeah, I did not expect when I started going through this a couple of weeks ago to be schooled in ancient Greek, but there I was.
Yes. Yeah. Well, this is the funny part of it. And this is, I guess, to the extent my take on productivity is different than most people. So when I was an undergrad, I studied ancient philosophy. That was like a thing. I was really into it. I read Plato, Aristotle, St. Thomas Aquinas. I mean, all the way through, and I really enjoyed reading those classics. And the thing that fascinated me back in 1988 was how these thousands of year old guys were struggling with the same questions that we struggle with today, right? I mean, in a lot of ways, Aristotle was asking the same things that we're asking now. I mean, when you compare the time, at the time, they lived in a society that everybody pretty much had, or at least these guys had a roof over their head. They had food on the table. So their basic needs were met. But then they were saying, well, how do I enjoy, how am I happy as a human? It was a huge question for them. And they thought about it. And I always use this summary, and I know Greek and ancient philosophy professionals are going to argue with me, but I think my take from reading a lot of this stuff is a lot of the schools, not all of them, but a lot of them kind of came to the conclusion that the recipe for happiness is that you live in accordance with your principles and ethically. Like, you figure out what it is that's important to you, and you live a life dedicated to those things, and you do that ethically. And if you do that, you're happy. And it's not about accumulating money. It's not about answering 20 emails in a time it takes 10. It's about pursuing the right things and doing it ethically. And that really resonated with me. And just to give a little more backstory, when I got in law school, and I share this story in the course, but when I got in law school, I got a merit scholarship, which was great because I came from a family, we didn't have any money. So getting through law school without having to pay a lot of money each year was a great thing for me, but I had to stay at the top of the class to keep the scholarship. And I was super freaked out about it when I started, because law school is not like any other school I've ever been to. They don't have quizzes and midterms. You have no idea if you're any good at it. There's one test at the end of the semester, and that's your grade in the class, however you do on that test. So here I am showing up at law school, knowing that I've got to stay at the top of the class, but I'm not going to know for 6 months if I'm any good at it. That's the kind of thing that can give you a little anxiety, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I went back to Aristotle, and I thought about this term of arete. So arete is a term. It wasn't just Aristotle used it. A lot of guys back then used it. Stoics used it, Stoicism is very popular now, but even more kind of the Aristotelian school was saying arete is a term they use. It's often translated in modern English as virtue, but I argue with that because I think it really is more of like excellence.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like virtue has like a Victorian virtue, kind of has a bit of a different feel to it modernly. But by virtue, they meant virtue entirely as a human being, that you're virtuous man, virtuous woman, and like the best version. Kind of thing. And so I thought about that when I was dealing with this problem in the first year of law school. I said, well, why don't I adopt this arete, seek my arete as a law student, which doesn't mean I do well on tests, but means that I study everything. I read every case I read the cases that are referenced in the case. I put 100% of what I have into being the best possible law student. And then at the end, it doesn't matter. If I get the scholarship, that's great. If I don't get it, I'll know that there was nothing I could have done more. Right.
Right.
So I pursued my arete, and it worked. I got good grades. I kept my scholarship, and it was a great thing to get me through. But like a bozo, I left that term at Pepperdine Law School. I didn't take it in the rest of my life. And so then fast forward like 20 years, and I'm trying to struggle with my life and figure out what's important to me. And I'm realizing roles are important. I'm like, well, how do I judge myself on these roles? How do I decide if I'm actually doing good in these roles? Mm-hmm. And then it just kind of like got a bolt out of the air. It's like, arete. Yeah. The same thing I did back in law school. It's like I had the answer 20 years ago and I just left it there. It's almost embarrassing. I talk about it in the course. It's like when you realize, oh yeah, I had the answer my 20s and I didn't pick it up again until I was in my 40s. But arete. So what I did is once I picked my roles, then I decided, well, what's the best version of me in each one of those roles? What's the best possible husband, the best possible Max Sparky? And I define that. And then now when I sit down and do reviews and look at my tasks and my projects, and everything grows out of this arete. It's like, how do I get closer to that in the next week, the next month, the next quarter? And that is the cycle I'm on, right? And I get all of this feedback, and I'm always looking to get a little better at it. And when people ask me, well, how do you do all this stuff? Well, I pursue my arete, and that's really the foundation of it. And there's a lot more stuff I go to in the course, because I feel like I feel like modern kind of productivity techniques are also important. Hyper scheduling. There's a whole bunch of different things that I do to kind of make that happen, but it all serves up to the roles in the arete. Everything I do is seeking to make a better version of myself. And then I can use all the cool tricks so long as they're serving that. And then suddenly everything kind of gets easy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's a lot of overlap there with the rules-based approach, right? If you know that you are pursuing excellence in whatever area, whether it be school or work or whatever, it creates that framework. You said it perfectly a second ago, that you knew that if you got to the end of the semester and the grades weren't what you were hoping for, then you knew you hadn't left anything on the table, right? You weren't going to be playing the game of, I wish I had done this or I should have done that, because you made a decision to pursue it to the best of your ability. And I think in one sense that requires some amount of foresight, that, hey, I know that there's this thing at the end of the road and I want to be in this place with that thing, with that relationship. But I would also say that in looking at that, it doesn't mean that you can't start now, right? I think sometimes in these conversations, people feel like, I know I've certainly been in this place of like, well, I've had this area that I feel like I haven't been doing the best that I could, that I haven't been pursuing excellence or been my best version of myself. And it's kind of easy to just like throw your hands up. But I think you're actually saying the opposite. Like, there's no better time than to start now, because you know what you can do.
Yeah, the Chinese proverb about growing a new tree. What's the best time to grow a tree? 20 years ago? Or what's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago? What's the second best time to plant a tree? Today. And,
yeah, exactly.
And I got because I released the course to the labs members before it went out to the public. So there's some people that have been working with this material as we record now for 3 or 4 weeks. I got an email from a labs member who's 86 years old.
Wow.
First of all, I love that I have an 86-year-old labs member.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And he said he's sitting down with his wife, and he's designing his roles in arete for his life right now. He says, I wish I had this material when I was in my 20s, but I'm 86 and I'm going to do it. And it made me so happy to read that. And I wrote him back and I said, I wish I had this material when I was in my 20s too. So you're okay. It's like, I put this together about, I don't know, because it kind of came over organically. Like, I found roles, and then it took me about a year to realize arete is the measure. And the thing about the arete is, now in law school, I used it in one dimension, arete as a law student, but now it's arete for me for everything. But, when you read the Greeks, they talk about the virtuous man or the arete. And it was always a struggle, because it's like, as everything you do, how do you judge yourself and am I virtuous on a whole? I think that's very difficult. But to me, breaking it down by each role is something very easy to digest and judge yourself on and try and improve upon. So anyway, it just took me a long time to figure this stuff out, but it's been working for me now for a long time. And I eventually decided to do this course, but I even wanted to have more experience with it before I started talking to people about it. But it's just been a really good foundation for me. It is the system I will use for the rest of my life. I'm not going to app shop my framework. I've got what I want.
Yeah.
I actually like the fact that this term arete, because I like connecting myself to Aristotle, because I feel like, I'm not out on an island here.
Exactly.
Humans have been struggling with this forever. And 3,000 years from now, people are still going to struggle with this. But I've got this foundation that goes back thousands of years, and it's a bit of my own interpretation and my own kind of slant on it. But at the same time, I feel a connection, and that gives me something solid to build upon.
And if you're out there and you're listening to this podcast in the episode 3024, send us an email, so let us know if you're still struggling with it. One of the sort of more concrete things in the field guide is the use of reviews. This is something that I've really become convicted of. Really, when I first went indie, now like 8.5, 9 years ago, of sitting down and actually taking some time and trying to be objective about it, about where I am in terms of all of these things. I tend to do this quarterly, but you speak about annual, quarterly, monthly, and weekly. What are some things if people don't have a review system in place, where would you have them start?
Well, I think that if you're interested in like roles in Arete, the whole thing is improvement cycles. Like you write down what the ideal husband is, and you say, okay, this is where I'm doing good, this is where I'm doing bad. But in the next 3 months, I'd like to get better at doing this one thing. Like, when Daisy, she went back to work with a job about a year ago. And that's like one of my reviews was, okay, what is the household stuff I can do now? Like how much laundry, how many nights can I have dinner on the table? Like, what are the things I can do to make her life easier? Because that's what the perfect ideal husband to her would do as she's trying to adjust to a career, right? So I made a list of things to do. And it's like, it gets practical at the end. Like, what action do you take in your life to improve upon that? But I do that in these feedback loops. And to me, quarterly is the key. Like if you're just going to do one, quarterly is great, but you have to do them. Like once you decide what your roles in your Arete, you have to sit down once in a while and say, well, where am I doing well? Where am I doing poorly? What action can I take in the next 3 months to get closer to that ideal? Mm-hmm. And that's it. But I do it quarterly. The primarily one for me, the big one is quarterly. Every quarter I go through. And not only do I judge myself on them, I also look at the definitions to see if they've changed. I talked about this in the course, but I've had a lot of changes with my Arete for my kids as they've got older, because the things they need as an ideal father at when they're in their 20s is different than something they need when they're 12.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that stuff changes over time, and then I kind of make my game plan. And it's very rewarding at the end of that quarterly review to see all these things I've written down I'm going to do to get closer to that ideal. And then in the next 3 months, I can look again. But I do check-ins on a monthly and a weekly basis. So I'm constantly looking at this stuff. It's always at the top of mind. Like I've got the thing written down in a book. I've got it in an Apple Note. I've got it in Obsidian. So I've got stuff all over the place that constantly is reminding me that I'm trying to pursue this, which leads to another bit of interesting questions I've got. Since I released this, a lot of people are like, yeah, but you're never going to get there, right? You're never actually going to get to the ideal version. I'm like, no, I'm probably not, but it doesn't matter. It's the pursuit of it. It's the activity of trying to become the ideal version that you get all the benefit from. It doesn't matter if you get there or not, as long as you're trying.
One reason I really like the quarterly review is the cadence really works for me. I feel like if I look at my year and I divide it into 4 roughly equal sections, then it just makes a lot of sense. Maybe that's because I have school-age kids. It's like we're already kind of on the quarterly or semesterly, like everything revolves around that in our household, it feels like. But, for me, when I was getting started with it, now it becomes very natural. Like I kind of can feel when the end of a quarter is coming up almost. Like, hey, I haven't sat down to write about these things or go back over my notes on these things for a while. So now I kind of sense it. But you know what I did at the beginning? I just made a repeating task. It was that simple of hey, hold your quarterly review. And I know in the guide, you talk about the different ways you can do that. For me, I have an Apple Note for the year, kind of looking at some things that I want to accomplish, looking at those roles. And then there's a header for each quarter, and it lets me kind of get a bird's eye view. And I can go back. I've got, this is my 5th year now kind of using this system. And it's amazing to look back on occasion. I don't do it every quarter, but occasionally, usually at the end of the year, I'll look back over the previous year too. And you can really see those changes. And when I do those quarterly and I'm successful at that, I can see the changes in these areas. And for me, that's a great way to sort of fight off either frustration or oh, I wanted this or this to happen and it didn't. Or I'm leaving breadcrumbs for myself so I can go back and see the decisions I made, the things that went into those. And it's a very useful tool. I'm really glad you included the review cycle in this because it's been really critical for me over the years.
Yeah, I mean, wait until go back and look at your review from 5 years ago, especially if you like on a roles-based system, and see how much progress you've made. It's shocking if you stay with it. The big inspiration for me on the quarterly thing was a book. I don't remember when it was released, but I read it years ago by Brian Moran and Michael Lennington called The 12-Week Year. And the idea was, a year is too long to like make goals and projects because, as humans, we have to have a shorter time cycle. Because if we plan like, I'm going to do this big thing this year, you just don't even think about it till October, right? Because in January, the end of the year is so far away, right? And then you don't end up doing it. Giving yourself that sense of urgency to say, well, I'm going to do this in the next 12 weeks. That's a different thing, right? So that's one of the reasons that I leaned into this quarterly thing. Mike and I talk about it on the Focus podcast all the time, but I feel like a quarter is a great increment of time because you can really move the needle in 12 weeks, but it's short enough that you can also get that feedback loop. And like, it's interesting, like if you have something like last year, we had a family thing that came up that took a lot of my time. And when I looked at my review of that quarter, I'm like, well, I didn't really do much of the stuff that I wanted to, but I actually did a lot because there was something on a more important role that became important, and I gave that the time it needed, and I felt good about the quarter, even though I didn't do the stuff I had planned on. And then you just say, okay, well, in the next 12 weeks, let's fix it, and you correct over time.
Yep.
So it really is very adaptable. Part of the trick of all this stuff is to not be too hard on yourself. It's very easy to like beat yourself up. That's not the goal here. But yeah, the review cycles are the way that gives you the reps to get better and pursue the arete.
Yeah.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by Squarespace. Go to squarespace.com/MPU and save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using the code MPU. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business online. These days, you do need your own website, and Squarespace makes it ridiculously easy to make a beautiful, powerful website. With Squarespace, you can engage your audience, sell anything, your products, services, and even the content you create. And Squarespace has got everything you need all in one place. With Squarespace, you can sell your products in an online store. Whether you sell physical or digital products, Squarespace has the tools you need to start selling immediately. And when your customers go to purchase, they get flexible payment options. You can make checkout seamless for your customers with simple but powerful payment tools, accept credit cards, PayPal, and Apple Pay, and offer customers the option to buy now and pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay. And you'll know what you need to grow your business with analytics. With Squarespace, you can learn where your site visits and sales are coming from and analyze which channels are most effective. Improve your website and build a marketing strategy based on your top keywords or most popular products and content. I've been using Squarespace websites since Squarespace was a brand new company, and I cannot recommend them enough. It's just so easy to get started with Squarespace, and they do have a really powerful tool set there. So whatever it is you want to do with your website, they've got you covered. There are some truly remarkable business and personal websites on Squarespace out there. Anybody can make it. It's affordable, but powerful. So if you want to learn more, check out squarespace.com/MPU for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/MPU and use that code MPU to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain, and to show your support for the Mac Power Users. Our thanks to Squarespace for bringing us all easily accessed and powerful websites for so many years, and all of their support of the Mac Power Users and Relay FM.
So you've talked some about this idea kind of surfacing for you back in law school. I assume back then you didn't think one day I'll make a field guide out of this. So what was the turn from this being something that you were using and thinking about to it being something that you could help others with?
I've got like reviews going back 13 years, but the arete didn't show up till 12 years ago. And like, so it's like all this stuff just kind of evolved for me. But as I was busy and MacSparky was getting more successful and I was getting a bigger reach, a lot of people were writing saying, I don't understand how you do it all.
Yeah.
Like, and people were specifically asking, make a field guide explaining how you do it all. That's the one I want, and that started like 10 years ago or so. I mean, back very early in the process. And I didn't feel ready to share it because I'm like, first of all, it's like, okay, let me explain to you. I'm using a Hellenistic based theory on an old word. And it's like, it's like, I mean, I'm sure people have already turned the show off because of that. Right. But that was what I was doing. And it's like, how do I explain that? But then I started like toying with the idea of maybe doing something with it. And in fact, it predates the time that I moved to Teachable and started making the field guides primarily video, because I started writing a book. And I first started writing the book in iBooks Author, but then iBooks Author kind of died and I moved it over to Pages. And I've had this book like bubbling in the background for years that I'd write on and then I'd stop. And I was looking, I found some files 7 years old on this project that I had worked on. So wow. This has been going on for a long time. And then like I would get to the, I always thought this was a January release. I think that's when people are in the mood to think about this stuff. And so often I would kind of get close to it and then I'd back away from it. Adina, did some of that Stick Sparky stuff years ago. And she was telling me when I told her this year, I'm like, no, or at the end of 2023, no, I'm really going to get it out. She says, that'd be great. I'd love that. Because every year I wonder if this will be the year that you finish it or not, And, so like it's a lot of videos, and like all the videos, I shot them 2 years ago before the studio was built, the last year before the studio was built. I shot them all in the yellow room, where I was working out of during pandemic.
Yeah.
I shot all those videos already once, and then I looked at them and I'm like, they're not good enough. They look like hostage videos. It was just not good enough. And so I think I've got them around here in a folder somewhere, but I didn't use any of that stuff. I came back and did it all fresh again, leading up to the release of this one. And so this has been a project that I've struggled with. I mean, it's kind of funny because you've heard of the term imposter syndrome, but I did feel it a bit because people are used to me talking to them about technology. They're not used to me talking to them about Aristotle and Arete. So I didn't know if people would even want this message. And when you make one of these, it's actually quite a bit of money and time that you put into the development of one of these field guides. I thought, well, I'll feel silly if I make this and nobody buys it. And it was just like this passion project that nobody cared about, But so I went back and forth on the kind of that. But then as I started sharing it with people, and I think the MacSparky Labs helped a lot because I was teasing some of this out in the MacSparky Labs, and some of the labs members really connected with it. And I start to think, okay, well, this could help more people than just me. So I decided to just get it done. And it's funny because I have an old friend that I sent a copy of this to, who's kind of into what I do, but not super techie, And he wrote me as I was finishing it up, because I sent him an early release, and he says, I don't think this is you. This is like, I don't think this is what you do as MacSparky. I think that you're making a huge mistake here. I'd encourage you just let it go, And it was like at the very end, and it was like, it was not mean advice. It was somebody that loves me and is trying to protect me from making a fool of myself. And I slept on it. I'm like, nah, he's wrong. I'm going to do this. But it was like, even at the very end, I almost pulled the plug on it. It's just such an unusual title for me, because that's not what I never have any of those feelings making one about OmniFocus or shortcuts, right?
Right. Yeah. That's your wheelhouse.
But it was, and also it's the videos are frankly pretty personal. It's like, it's a little bit vulnerable really when you talk about this stuff. And so it's just a very different thing. So it had a long journey, a long incubation period, but in the end, I'm very happy and proud of what it's done. And the feedback has been amazing. I mean, it's like, I always get testimonials when I release a new title, and the testimonials I'm getting on this one are just amazing because people are changing their lives with it. And, that's not something I ever expected to do with a field guide.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, and you talk about it in the guide a good bit, that the fact that this has been such a long process, that is something that you first came across all those years ago and it resurfaced for you later, like that grounds it all in a way that I think, even if someone even if it's not for them, or they're like, oh, the classic internet stick to tech, which, boy, that comment gets under my skin sometimes, that it is personal, right? And watching these and listening to your voice talk about these things, like, you can tell it's really personal. And I think that gives this field guide a platform to stand upon that makes it okay that it's different, right? I think if this was your first one or your second one, it'd be different. But because people know you and your work that you've done and your thoughtfulness and these other things, now they kind of see like behind the curtain a little bit. Like, oh, this is to go back to what you said a minute ago. This is how he does all these things. But more importantly, this is why he does all these things. And I think that the sequence of those things, you including the backstory, you including all the history, I think all that really is important to it. And I'm glad that you included it.
Yeah, and even though I'm not the productivity guru, and I don't specialize in that stuff, I do ship. I've proven that the system works.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just been so happy with the feedback. Regardless of how many copies of this thing I sell, it's just the fact that people are getting it and using it. That's what I wanted, and I am thrilled. I'm just absolutely thrilled with the initial reception of this. I should have mentioned earlier, if you use the code PFGMPU, you get 10% off. But yeah, it's just been awesome,
Mm-hmm.
getting it out. People are loving it, and I've now got a whole bunch of people out in the world pursuing Arete, which is awesome. A couple people have written me and say, I don't like your Greek stuff. I'm just going to call it perfection. I'm like, what? Use whatever word you want.
Find your word. Yeah. Yeah, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
One thing that I have been curious about, I haven't asked you yet, because we've been talking all week about how it's going, is I know when you have a field guide on a technical topic, you sort of expect a set amount of customer support things, right? Like maybe they have questions about an included workflow, or like I know when you do shortcuts, you include a lot of example shortcuts people can take and remix. This isn't like that. I mean, you mentioned that you give homework in this, but it's not like you can give somebody a keyboard maestro macro so they can work out their roles. And so what has that been like from like sort of the, not necessarily like the feedback, like, hey, I love this, or hey, I think you're a crazy hippie, but like, what does support look like for a guide like this?
Well, it's been interesting. Yeah, I do know, because it went out, the Labs members got early access, but the, it's questions about like, well, how do like some people go through the carrying water exercise and says, well, I've identified a role here that I'm not actively pursuing, but now I'm interested in it. How do I incorporate that? People asking mechanical questions about how they incorporate things they're learning about themselves. And so it's more productivity focused, or I hate to use the word productivity. It's more kind of life roles focused questions.
Mm-hmm.
So just implementation details. And like in the course, I do some screencasting, like how do you figure out your roles? And I do it, and I do all the stuff in like Apple Notes and like the most basic apps I can use. I use, when I talk about block scheduling, I use Calendar instead of Fantastical, because I didn't want this to be a field guide about like making people feel like, oh, I've got to learn Obsidian to do this. No, you could do this with a piece of paper and a pencil.
I noticed you even said that a few times, like use the tools that you have.
Yeah. I mean, whatever you're comfortable with, because the hard work of this system is not learning an app, it's figuring out what's important to you. But the payoff is now you know what's important to you. So when people ask you to do things, you can measure it against that. And saying no gets way easier. And, you feel like when at the end of each quarter, you've actually made progress on the things important to you and you're not wasting your life. So it's really, that's what I'm aiming for here with this one. And then that's why it's such an unusual title, but it's a lot of fun getting it out there. And I'm very happy with the response to it.
Good. I think you should be. And I'm so happy that people are responding to it. I was not worried about that, because I've heard you talk about these things for so long that I knew they were going to resonate with people. But I'm sure it is scary to hit the publish button on something that is really different from what you normally do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I did get a few of those emails, stay in your lane emails, but
Yeah.
But overall, people have been very supportive, and you always get some negative. I mean, anytime you do something, in fact, if you don't get some negative, then you're probably not taking enough risks.
Yeah, no one's paying attention, right?
Yeah. On the back end, another thing I've done is, because of this process, you get a lot of feedback on yourself over time. Like, you go back and say, well, what were the concerns I had 6 months ago, 12 months ago? How am I doing on that stuff? And I noticed, doing my own quarterly review at the end of the year, that like a recurring theme for me is the amount of time I spend on administrative stuff, because I have the field guides and the labs, and there's a lot of stuff that comes in, like people need to consolidate an account, or they're having a problem with some, whatever. And I've always done that myself. And like, that came out of this is like, oh, you know what? I don't have time for that anymore. I'm gonna hire somebody to do that, and that's something I've been doing, and I've got a person who's testing the job right now. So we don't have a commitment yet, but this person, if he ends up doing it, it'll be great. But like with this release, it's been awesome in the sense that we've been getting back to customers faster and doing a better job because I'm not doing it all.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been another nice bit of a difference with this release for me. Is like, yeah, so I can focus on the questions that people have about the system and let the more administrative stuff go to the helper. This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by Indeed. Go to Indeed.com/MPU and join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide using Indeed to hire great talent fast. When you're hiring, it feels amazing to finally close out a job search. But what if you could get rid of the search and just match? You can with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And it doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. When you're hiring, I feel like there's two things you need. You need someone with the appropriate skills, but you also need someone with the appropriate attitude. Going through Indeed takes care of that first question for you. It only gets you those matching candidates that give you the skill sets you need. Then you can go through and find the right fit for you. And leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use it, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners to this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get their jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/MPU. Just go to INDEED.com/MPU right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on the Mac Power Users. Once again, that's Indeed.com/MPU. Terms and conditions apply. But do you need to hire? You need Indeed. And our thanks to Indeed for sponsoring the Mac Power Users and all of Relay FM.
So what's next? This one is out. I know this has been cooking for a long time. You mentioned the webinars for the people with the Plus guide.
Yeah. That's going to be a lot of work, weekly webinars, and from the Obsidian one, hundreds of people show up every week. So you really want to deliver the goods, and then you want to get them turned around so the people who can't make it can watch the video. And this one, because it's such a hippie topic, it's going to be personal. So I'm looking forward to that, but I'm also I'm acknowledging that I'm going to be busy with that for the next quarter.
Yeah.
The other stuff that's up next for me is I feel like part of the deal with my field guides is I often give free updates to them, and especially on apps as they do kind of incremental updates. And I haven't been delivering on that the last couple of years because career transition, building a studio, all this stuff, I want to get into the saddle on that. Like I think probably before the end of this quarter, it's one of my goals for this quarter is to ship an update to a free update to the Keyboard Maestro field guide, because they've done some big updates. I want to make a series of videos. So the people who have that will get the most up-to-date videos. And there's a couple others I want to start doing that on. I've got a couple titles in mind for this year, but my goal right now is to start getting some free updates out and get through this webinar series.
Yeah, I mean, looking back through the library now, just as you're speaking, there's a lot of stuff in here, and I'm sure it can be maybe a little overwhelming to try to pick what gets an update when. I don't envy that, but I'm glad that you do it, and I think it adds real value to what you make.
Yeah, I mean, usually what I do is I do free updates for incremental updates to the software, and when they do like a major update, if I have to reshoot the whole thing, then it's a new version. And if you bought the prior version, I give you a discount and blah blah blah. And I think probably OmniFocus will be next on this list. I haven't firmly decided that yet, but I'm kind of leaning that direction. But right now, I'm really focused on getting these webinars and making them as good as possible. And honestly, as much as I've enjoyed the productivity thing, I also really like just making the traditional MacSparky field guides where it's about technology, and I'm looking forward to doing some of that. It is emotionally draining making this productivity field guide, and there's not as much invested in the other one. So do that. But I also, now that I've got productivity out there, I want to stay engaged with it, and I want to continue to kind of push the needle forward on this idea of roles-based productivity and Arete, because I'm already seeing that it can help people. And the real goal of my life at this point is to help people. And whether you're 86 or 20, I'd like you to consider using this system to kind of give yourself a framework.
Yeah, people should definitely go check it out. I wholeheartedly agree. And I usually fall into one of those camps that we talked about at the beginning of the show. Like, I think the way a lot of people talk about productivity is not really for me. But I really did connect with this one, and I think in particular the roles based view of things, even though that's echoed some of the stuff I've kind of found naturally over the last couple of years, I walked away with a lot of stuff to implement, sort of in the way that I approach things. And so for that personally, thank you, and again, congrats on shipping this. I think people are gonna really find it meaningful.
Yeah, it also just feels good to ship this one because I didn't know if I would. I mean, there's a part of me that thought of that's something that I would play with but never actually release to the world. If there was one that I thought would never ship, it might have been this one. I was doing an exercise last year, early last year. The Greeks called it memento mori, the idea that none of us live forever, right? And it's like, what's important, and like. The exercise is like, if you just got hit by a bus and you're sitting on the side of the road, what's your regret? And I thought about it for each role.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's my biggest regret if I drop dead today with my wife, with my kids, and I decided to act on those. And my biggest regret for MacSparky was that I never shipped this productivity field guide when I went through that exercise. So that was kind of the impetus about last March that said, you know what, I'm going to get this thing done, and it's going to get out in January. And so I did that, and that feels good, when you check that off.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening to this very special episode of the Mac Power Users.
Yeah.
We didn't talk much about apps or workflows, but if you're still here, that means you were interested, and I really appreciate that. You can go check it out at learn.macsparky.com. The course is there. Use that code PFGMPU for 10% off, and you can get that. That's for a limited time, by the way. So go get it. And thank you to our sponsors today, 1Password, Squarespace, and Indeed. We're the Mac Power Users. You can find us at relay.fm/MPU, and we'll see you next time.